So in this video, I'm going to take a look at the process of memorization. So let's first define what I mean by memorization. So anything we want to learn how to do almost certainly requires some knowledge of facts and rules to be able to do it. And the process of committing these facts and rules to your long-term memory is what I mean by memorization. And by being in the long-term memory, what I mean is that you should be able to recall this information at any point, be it in a few hours or in a few years' time. So we're going to look at a few different methods you can use to help you do this, but they all work on the principle we need to make your brain work much harder when it interacts with the information we're trying to learn. So the main problem that most people have is they don't work hard enough when they're trying to memorize stuff. And what we really need to do is make it more difficult for our brain, because that's going to make it more likely for our brain to remember the information. So let's first look at why information that we try and learn doesn't end up in our long-term memory. So some scientists have actually managed to look at a relationship between time and how much information you can remember. So if I sat down today and tried to learn some facts, essentially at that point I would have 100% of the information. But what this graph shows that after mere 20 minutes, you've already lost half of that information you've tried to memorize. And then as the time goes by, we see we have access to a smaller and smaller percentage of that information. So this is why most of the information that we come across in a given day is not in our long-term memory, because our brain has deleted it while we are asleep. And it starts by deleting things it doesn't think are very important. So things that it's only encountered once, or things that it didn't work very hard on. So how can we stop this process and actually start remembering a higher percentages of our information? Well, the first thing we can do is go back to the information. So the more times our brain has come across a piece of information, the more likely it is to think it's important, and things that it comes across a lot will be remembered by the brain. So you can see on the graph here that every time you review information, you can increase your attention back up to 100%. And what happens is the more times you come across it, the slower the process of deleting information happens, to the point where your brain no longer deletes it and keeps it in the long-term memory. So there are a couple of key times in this process. The first is 24 hours or 1 day after you first came across information. This time is critical to reviewing it, because we can essentially put back key information we've lost overnight, and then that starts the process of your brain turning it into a long-term memory. And the next significant date is usually about a week afterwards. So we reviewed it once after 24 hours. About a week later, if we review it again, we have a very good chance of that information heading towards our long-term memory there. So what I'm going to show you next is a few strategies to help you do this and to make it as easy as possible. So I use a website for doing this. It's called Memorise, and I'm not sponsored by them. I just think it's really good, and it's free to use as well. So Memorise allows you to create courses to help you learn key information. So I use it for learning languages, for instance, but you can use it for learning key information for any topic that you like. If you go on there, you'll find people have made lots of courses which you can access already, but you should not go anywhere near those courses at all. This process is going to be most effective if you make your own course. Yes, that is harder work, but that is the point. We want to make this harder work. So taking the time to make your own course is part of making it harder. So, for instance, you might want to create one about what memorization is and the key learning points from this video, for instance, which you can do. So instead of finding one someone else has already made, which is pretty low effort, you can actually make one specific to what you need, which is a high effort activity and makes it more likely you'll remember the information. So just some guidance here. I try to keep my courses to 10 to 15 keywords, just so you don't overload yourself every time you're reviewing information there. So just some advice. So you put in the information you want to remember, and this is where most people will be like, okay, and now I can just practice it. But this is where we need to work even harder. So one of the nice things Memorise does is it has this thing called mems, which allow you to create something to help you remember the keyword. So here, this was a course I was making for GCSE Physics, which I'm a teacher of. So I encourage the students, and when I'm doing courses, I make this as well, to make mems to help them remember. So I'll show you an example. This is one from the course I made for learning the parts of the brain. So you can see here on this one, I attach pictures to it to help turn it into a visual thing to make it more powerful to remember. And we've got lots of information there, but it's a way of essentially triggering my memory for the key information there. So if your mems are very silly, if they're really visual, they're going to really help you remembering stuff. So that's creating mems to help you. Then Memorise is really good because it has the key times built into it. So after 24 hours, it will prompt you to review information. And then after a week, it will prompt you to review information again. And words that you struggle with, it will prompt more often to help you learn them. So you can see the German words that I've learned over here, I've committed them to my long-term memory, so it's not going to test me for another 157 days. So I've gone through the process of reviewing the information. Memorise is happy that I've learned them and committed them to long-term memory, so it's going to wait a long time before it tests me again. Okay, so that's the process of reviewing. Let's try and help make the information more memorable next. So what we're going to do is look at a process called visualization. So this is something our brains are really good at. We can have very clear images in our head without even looking at the thing. And this served a very important evolutionary purpose because it was a massive advantage to remember what food looks like, what poison food looks like, what a tiger looks like so you can run away. So all of those things were good for our survival, which is why our brain is very good at them. So we can take advantage of this by turning information we want to know into a visual image. So here you can see on the left, here's my image to help remember about the cerebrum, which is part of your brain. And in the picture, we've got the key information you need to know about it. So it's a giant because it's the largest part of your brain, and it's got some information to help me remember what the word is for it, and also how much of the brain it takes up there. So this will make it much more likely to be remembered. In terms of psychology terms, it's called being sticky. So it makes the information stick in your head and make it easier to remember. So that's visualization. But what if we want to remember a sequence of things, not just a key word with its definition? Well, this is where something called a learning journey comes in, or sometimes it's referred to as a memory palace. So as we saw in the previous slide, our brains are very effective at remembering images, and they're also very effective at remembering routes and paths, because quite frankly, we wanted to know where food was, where we should avoid because there's tigers or dinosaurs or whatever there. So that's important to our survival. So we can take advantage of this by creating routes of information, because then that will help us remember it. So I use a route around my house. So I have locations around my house where I put information in the form of images. So this isn't, I don't actually have these pictures there. I picture them in my mind. And then in my head, I walk around my house and the information is at each of the locations. So I remember it in order. So I'm going to show you what this looks like because that's a bit abstract. So here is my story to try and learn the parts of the brain. So the first location I use in my house is the television, because it's a very visual object. It's an easy thing to attach visual images to, because there's always visual images on it anyway. So I imagine my channel my TV, I'm flicking through the channels, and on the first channel there's a giant using Siri to find Birmingham. So this is the one we've seen already. So if we look at the bottom, what that tells me is that the largest part of the brain is the cerebrum. So that's what I got from that. The next channel, we've got Belle from Beauty and the Beast, who I can picture clearly in my mind because I've watched it too many times. And she's using Siri to find, and then I'm imagining her really confused because she can't remember what she was even looking for. So that's telling me about another part of the brain, the cerebellum. The next channel, I can see my sister, who is someone I know very well, so I can picture her very clearly in my head. But she's eating an arm biscuit, and in my mind, this biscuit is massive and shaped like an arm, which looks ridiculous, but that makes it memorable. And that tells me about the limbic system, because your arm is a limb, and then we have the bic for biscuit, and then sister gives you system there. Finally, I see a guy called Brian. So I know someone called Brian, so I can picture him very clearly in my mind. And he's trying to grow a plant, and that gives me brainstem. So these are the 4 parts of the brain which I was trying to learn about there. And the more ridiculous these images are, the more likely you are to remember them. And the other key thing is you only try and encode key information. So don't try and encode a whole paragraph of text. Pick keywords out of that text and turn those into images. So now let's break down one of these because we want to know some more information about these parts of the brain. So we're going to look at how I learned about the limbic system. So food is really important to me as well. I basically never stop eating. So the fridge was the next location on my memory journey, and I chose images that match the location. So I chose images that were types of food, so that thinking about the fridge prompts me to remember them. So what I can see in my fridge, I can see some poisoned fowl, and that gives me the information about the thalamus. So the fowl triggers me to remember thalamus, and the poison triggers me to remember it's something to do with pain, because being poisoned I imagine to be very painful. We see a grumpy hot sandwich at the bottom, so I'm imagining a sandwich jumping up and down, being really irritable. So that gives me the hypothalamus. So hypo means low or lower if you translate it, so that's how I know hypothalamus. And grumpy gives me mood, hot gives me temperature, and then sandwich gives me hunger, because those are the functions that the hypothalamus is responsible for monitoring. I see my scared friend Amy. Yes, it's very odd to see your friend in a fridge, but the fact it's odd makes it memorable. Amy gives me amygdala, which is the part of the brain, and scared gives me what it's responsible for responding to fear. The last thing, I can't find the hippo meat. So the hippocampus is the last part of the limbic system, and it's responsible for location, which is why I said I couldn't find it, but it's also responsible for turning short-term memories into long-term memories, which is why this journey method is so effective, because the part of the brain we're using is also the part that forms memories. So this is my story. So I keep a log of all the stories that I write, and I keep them on my blog. So I have a blog of all the stories that I have made to learn different things, and do check it out. You can see my other learning journeys to learn about Mozart, to learn about Izek Klychev, and it will have all the things I learn about as I go on. So that's how I keep my stories, so I can always look back at them if I can't quite remember them. And then what I did was I created a course. So here it is. I created a Memorise course with each of the parts of the brain and what they do, and you can find it at this link if you want to check it out. And the reason I did this is because Memorise has an app. So if I find I'm sitting on a bus, train, whatever it is, I can always practice this information if I have a few spare minutes instead of wasting that time. But when I the course, for each of these I created mems to try and help me remember, and these are the parts of the story that you saw in the blog and I went through earlier, because this really helps with making the information sticky and go into your long-term memory. So I'm going to stop there because I think this video has been long enough already. So just to quickly summarize with a few questions people would typically ask: is this hard work? Yes, it is. It's much harder than just sitting there blankly staring at a teacher or staring at a textbook. But that is the point. The harder you work with the information, the more likely you are to remember it. That's key. Is it always going to be this hard? No, it isn't. So the first time you do this, you will feel like your brain is about to explode. It is really difficult going through this process the first time. And now I've gone through it a few times, however, I actually am starting to find it easier and easier to create these stories and create these mental images, because I've learned what works for me, the type of things that I remember, and I've also practiced doing it, so it's just much easier there. So yes, it's hard the first time, but keep persisting. You'll get there and you'll remember a lot of stuff. Last question, should I give it a go? Yes, absolutely. Go out, find some information you want to learn and get cracking. Use these methods. You'll be amazed how much you can remember. So, what's next? So first off, make yourself a learning journey. Put these skills to use, try them out. But also look out for future videos I'm going to make on different learning skills. So I'm going to look at how we can read more effectively, because what you find is most people read very effectively for reading a story, but they read very poorly for actually learning things. I'm going to look at how to ask really good questions to maximize your learning. And also we're going to look at actually how much you should be aiming to learn when you're sitting down to learn something and how to go about it, that kind of thing. But if you have any suggestions of things you would like me to have a look at, I would be more than happy to receive those. So please comment and let me know. And if you have any feedback on this video, please comment and let me know also. But lastly, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope to see you again soon.